Recognize our sponsor for the event today. Today we have Glenn Smith with Glenn Smith Executive Coaching. Glenn is a longtime supporter of our chamber and past chairman. Thank you, Glenn, for joining us today. And if you would like to come up and say a few words.
Never missed an opportunity like that. Thank you all for being here today. I'm delighted to be able to sponsor the event in partnership with the Fort Bend Chamber, a longtime partner for me and my business, and also huge supporter of our whole community here. I appreciate Tricia and her leadership on the infrastructure division. And what I do is I work with businesses to help them improve their organization, develop their leadership, and achieve greater management effectiveness and efficiency. And so I'll work with companies. I typically use a model called EOS. If you're familiar with the book Traction or EOS, that's a primary tool I use. I use other tools as well, but mainly I'm helping businesses develop scalable systems, structures, and teams. So if I can serve you, I'd be delighted to. And again, I appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you. And I also want to say a big thank you to Margaret for joining us and presenting this today. Really looking forward to it.
And at this time, I would like to introduce our speaker, Margaret A. Kidd. Ms. Kidd joined the University of Houston College of Technology in the fall of 2016 as Assistant Professor of Supply Chain and Logistics. Currently, she serves at the University of Houston Faculty Senate, Undergraduate Committee, and serves as a faculty advisor to the Supply Chain and Industrial Distribution Organization. In August of 2018, she was promoted to the Program Director for the Supply Chain and Logistics Technology Program and assumed leadership of the graduate program in January of 2020. Prior to joining to the University of Houston, Margaret served as the project director of TACT Links grant in San Jacinto College, where she was charged with participating in the Links Consortium and the U.S. Department of Labor grant in development and implementing a national recognizable series of 8 stackable and lattice credentials that provides workers with skills for entry and middle level supply chain management. She serves as a liaison for the Exporters Maritime Council, KBR Government Solutions, and is on the East End Chamber Commerce Advisory Board. Ms. Kidd has a bachelor's in general business and a master's in cross-cultural studies and has over 60 doctoral hours in urban planning and environmental policy with an emphasis on port-city interface, sustainability, and economic development. In August of 2017, Houston's Women's Magazine annual Nominate Her Awards recognized Margaret as she was awarded the Savvy Sister Award for making a significant career change and innovative change to her workplace related to the workforce development. So if you would please join me in welcoming our speaker, Margaret A. Kidd.
Well, good morning. Certainly, this is an exciting time to be talking about supply chain. Let me just make sure I get the clicker right. Getting it this way, correct? So for those of you that don't know about the U of H footprint, this actually is the building I work in here in Sugar Land off of University Boulevard, and I'm on the 2nd floor in the corner there. I guess I should start by saying Happy Lunar New Year. I'm just not sure how happy this year is going to be. It appears that we will probably have more of the same as we had last year, but we can hope for better. I want to show a short video, just a little bit about our program. Wait, it's playing. name's Margaret Kidd. I'm the Program Director for Supply Chain and Logistics Technology, College of Technology, University of Houston. Many of you have probably seen me over the last 2 years, either on BBC World News, Fox Morning with Maria, Sunday Night with Trey Gowdy in America, each time talking about supply chain disruption. The supply chain crunch the world has experienced the last 2 years during COVID has highlighted the need for resiliency, national infrastructure upgrade, and more saliently, the need for workforce development to meet 21st century job skills that match a global interconnected economy that is moving rapidly towards Industry 4.0, which will require bridging both the physical and digital divide. Our students are uniquely positioned to fill this gap. With the growth of the Port of Houston, Port Freeport, and international trade, and so many companies relocating to the great state of Texas, the opportunities are endless. There's a shortage of trained supply chain and logistics personnel. Our students maintain a higher than average income and have the prospect of futures with six-figure incomes. Students' skills and interest will drive them to hundreds of careers in the supply chain and logistics sector. Earning a supply chain and logistics technology degree opens up a world of opportunities. Join us today for that journey. I'm a shameless supporter of University of Houston and this region. I had the opportunity to make 5 videos kind of late November, early December. This was our generic video about the program, and then I have 4 more that are very focused on some things that we do. But I always like to mention Port Freeport. I made the mistake one time on a national interview and I said Port Houston and not Port Freeport, and a senior person ILA instant messaged me. So I'll never do that again. Okay, so let's just kind of get started. I mean, you see all these news articles, whether it's in the Chronicle, New York Times, TV, about supply chain, and it's bits and pieces of the story. And I just want to make it really simple. Just think of a set of dominoes, and when one falls, the whole deck falls, okay? And so, you know, there's the obvious COVID that we experienced the last 2 years, but now the issue is the breakthrough COVID and the zero tolerance policy in China. So every time there's even one person with COVID positive symptoms, a factory gets closed down, a port gets closed down, and it creates a domino effect. We're all interconnected. And then you add in some labor shortages, the Great Resignation, a shortage of trucks, drivers, chassis, warehouses at capacity, and then look at US ports. We are decades behind European and Asian ports. So Asian ports operate 24/7. That's part of the problem. And then secondly, we're just not digitized or automated. So hopefully some of this infrastructure money will be used to upgrade the port side. Okay, this is just a glimpse as of yesterday, kind of vaccination status. So you see where the weak links are as far as potential outbreaks, because COVID is relevant because it's going to slow down production, slow down transportation. And so Africa has almost no access, right? And even India and Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia have a very low vaccination rate. And you know, a lot of our manufacturing is in the Southeast Asian corridor. Okay, let me step around. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so this is third quarter e-commerce sales as a percentage of all retail sales. So prior to the pandemic, about 10% of all purchases in the US were e-commerce. And that shot up to almost 17%. So imagine you have a business and your revenues grow by 70% in 1 year. Do you have the infrastructure to accommodate that? Probably not. So that's part of the problem. Then think about, everyone asks, well, where did all these people get all this money? Well, most of us were working from home. We didn't have to pay for gas to go to work. We didn't have to buy clothes for work because we're all in our gym clothes, right? We weren't necessarily going on vacations. We definitely, the first year, we're not going to the spa or the gym or any service business, and then add in some government stimulus money. So there was a record amount of disposable income for all Americans, right? So that really led to this big shopping spree that started slowing down a little bit in December. Okay, these are the top ports in the world. So we had last year, a couple of ports in China closed down temporarily, a couple of weeks. But it's relevant because one was Ningbo, which is the third largest container port in the world, and the other was the Yantian terminal in Shenzhen, which is near Hong Kong. And so when you consider Ningbo trades about 30 million containers a year, and let's say you lose a couple of weeks of production, the Port of Houston traded 3.5 million, the throughput was about 3.5 million containers for the whole year. Imagine that amount of containers not moving, right, out of China that's just 1 month. So again, trickle down effect. Then you factor in that 40% of all these containers from these big Asian ports go into LA Long Beach. You have a natural bottleneck. Okay. The other big issue related to this supply chain disruption was a shortage of containers because of the demand, and then skyrocketing costs. So in 2019, one of these 40-foot containers was right under $2,000. And there were cases where people were paying $24,000, $36,000 at various points last year. I'm sure some of you probably read where Amazon started building their own containers and chartering ships. That was one of the responses to the bottlenecks, not to go into LA Long Beach, get a smaller ship and go into an alternative port. And that's also a policy that I advocate for, is diversification of your ports of entry. This is the best website, Marine Traffic. It's free, anyone can Google it, and you can look at a map anywhere, any port of the world, but this is LA Long Beach. And I did this snapshot last fall, but it gives you a feeling, the scale of the number of ships. So at one point, there may be 109 ships outside the port of LA Long Beach. So over 500,000 containers sitting on these ships. Now, I'm currently working with a group of little kids, like 9-year-olds. They're entering a Lego STEM competition called Container Connect. And they created a response to this. And there's a film I made with these kids that we'll be releasing probably next week. And it's really cute. So I'll share with Carrie and she can share with y'all. But we tried to use a real world situation to address. The other issues, especially in LA Long Beach, there's no vacancy rate for industrial real estate. It's like 1%. And the cost is about $1.41 per square foot. Whereas in Houston, our vacancy rate is around 7%. And I mean, we have available space. I want to say next year we have about 16 million square feet coming into the market, whereas LA Long Beach has 4 million. Where are those containers going to go? There's no real estate in the backside, right? It's like Houston, Freeport, Southeast Atlantic are ideal spots. So the result of all of this has been record inflation. How many of you have gone to the grocery store and wondered why you're paying more for beef or bacon or lettuce? Yeah. Well, it's the cost of the transportation, the cost of the warehousing, the shortage of workers, paying accelerated rates for the workers. And it impacts the most vulnerable people in our communities. So we're looking at an inflation rate of 7% as of the end of December, and that takes us back almost into the 1980s. And you consider 38 million Americans are food vulnerable. Here in our region, about 500,000 people are vulnerable from inflation. This is a map that one of my colleagues created for me for something I was working on. And we looked at poverty areas and food deserts. So these areas in the yellow are where, and this is what we do, logistics, right? So where would we put a food bank or a distribution center, a pop-up distribution center? It would be in one of these yellow areas, because the other thing is a lot of these people don't have cars either. And we all know there's a real lack of public transportation in our region. So this is, I mean, this is some of the stuff we do on the research side is we look at problems and then try to find solutions. Like in this case, where would we put a distribution center for a food bank? Okay, I know there's two people in the audience that own t-shirt companies. How has it been getting supplies? Yeah, so a lot of these t-shirts are made in China or Vietnam. Vietnam was totally locked down from middle of late June to about 1st of October. So that means no manufacturing. People were either at home or the few workers that were at factories were sleeping on the floors or in dormitories or at minimum staff. And so we looked into, where does Nike have their production facilities? Because we understood that 50% of Nike tennis shoes were made in Vietnam. And we wanted to get a feel where the other factories were in China because we were seeing rolling blackouts. There's a power shortage. And so we created this GIS map. And so just with an illustration of tennis shoes, you see the vulnerability of the supply chain. If you have power outages, you have closed ports, and a whole country is locked down. The solution is nearshoring, meaning moving production closer to our borders, whether it's Mexico, Central America, South America, possibly the Caribbean, and onshoring. And we have seen some examples of onshoring. So certainly the White House bill, the infrastructure bill, I think is going to help, but it's not enough. It's not enough for the port sector. When you factor in dredging that has to reoccur on a regular basis, and you factor in the need for just this increase in a digital footprint and automation, but it's a start. Okay, one of the things that I advocate for that all the major ports around the world use is a port community system. And that's where data is shared between all the stakeholders, whether it's the port authority, the rail people, the truck people, the manufacturer, the barge terminals, freight forwarders, trucking companies, and it all goes in and it's shared in a neutral platform. So you have this visibility. When you order something on Amazon, you're able to track it, right? Or FedEx. Okay, but that's not the way it works in supply chain, regrettably. So we don't have that same traceability. So moving into a digital world is going to be, another one of the solutions. Okay, so while the world was falling apart, a lot of good stuff was happening in Texas, like a whole lot of good stuff. Project 11 kicked off, which was the dredging, the widening of the Houston Ship Channel. Port Freeport began work on their expansion. The Highway 36A project is moving forward. And you saw a huge number of companies relocate from California, Tesla, Oracle, Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, and most recently, $19 billion Samsung in Taylor, Texas. So Austin is really staking its claim to being a technology corridor, but so is Houston, so is Dallas. So great stuff is happening. People are choosing Texas because there's no income tax. There's light bureaucracy vis-a-vis California. You have a workforce. It's just the quality of life is good. The one drawback, the reason all this trade goes into LA Long Beach is they go on these ships that hold 20,000 containers or 23,000 containers. So it's like real estate, it's economy of scale. Unfortunately, those size ships cannot go through the Panama Canal. It's a smaller ship that can hold up to about 14,000 containers. But what we've seen is the strategy has been folks are chartering their own ships, and there's ships that can hold these smaller units. And yes, they're coming to Houston, they're coming to these other ports. I think we'll continue to see, we're not going to see a mass exit from China. That was already, an exit from China has been happening in the last 10 years. Folks are moving to Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and I think you'll see more, but I'm hoping we see a trend of some nearshoring to Mexico, to the Caribbean. I think the next really big thing to be looking for here in our country and in Texas in particular is this growth of autonomous vehicles, in particular the truck sector. We're seeing all these major truck trials from Dallas to Houston, Houston to San Antonio. They're semi-autonomous. Unfortunately, each state determines their transportation rules. And so until there's a federal response and a consistent law, I mean, it's going to be several years before you see fully autonomous trucks running around the US. California doesn't even allow truck trials. So that's why a lot of these trials are happening here and in Arizona and in Florida. Last week, I was at a conference in Las Vegas, Manifest, and most of the major autonomous trucking companies were there with their vehicles. And I mean, it's an amazing story of how technology can possibly solve part of our driver shortage. So there was a driver shortage prior to COVID, and there's a record number of baby boomers retiring, and you don't have folks stepping up to the plate. So this is where technology is going to eventually solve part of that problem. This is my home here, Fort Bend County. And so my program is working on launching a supply chain innovation lab, and I have a short film, and I'm gonna let Ryan.
One more time.
Hey, Brandy, they all start the same.
Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Hu, Senior Vice President for Engineering and Quality, brings the real-life experience into the classrooms as adjunct faculty and also as the Chief Officer of the Supply Chain Innovation Lab, where we will develop collaborative bridges among students, faculty, and industry professionals and create innovative supply chain solutions transitioning to supply chain 4.0 by leveraging Internet of Things, AI, data analytics, digital twins, AR, VR, automations, and execution feedback loop. Prior to this exciting opportunity, I led, launched, and commercialized autonomous driving buses. I'm leading the deployment of smart mobility through the integration of autonomous buses and mobility services. I took now is the time to get a degree in supply chain logistics technologies, earn a bachelor degree of science, opens up a world of opportunities to enhance your career.
So when I took over our program, I took an inventory of, who we had teaching, and I was able to reshape our faculty, our adjunct faculty, and eventually our full-time faculty. Dr. Hugh has a PhD from Purdue, worked in Detroit in the auto industry and quality for 15 years. He lives in Sugar Land. He was a VP of an autonomous bus company, a startup in China, and he teaches 2 classes for me. And he regularly, so when you're an adjunct, you just get paid for teaching a class, right? But he goes with me. If I'm doing a panel discussion, he might be on the panel discussion. If I'm going to an event, I might bring him and his wife. So these are the type of people on my team. They're very hands-on. He's very brilliant, and he's really leading how we are going to move my program more into Industry 4.0, if you will. I'm not going to play this. Ryan can share these. Transport Topics did several interviews with me last year. The name probably won't ring a bell unless you're in the trucking industry. They're somewhat the voice of the American Trucking Association. They're based in Washington, D.C. They do very high-end journalism. So they do stories on intermodal, they do stories on maritime, trucking, logistics, et cetera. And then they have 8 radio shows on, is it called Mad Dog, Road Dog, Sirius FM? I think it's called Road Dog.
Road Dog.
Right. I've been on Road Dog. Anyway, twice. But this was a TV interview that they did at the end of the year. So I was their last person. So what's been amazing about this last 2 years, and especially the last 6 months, is for some reason, I became a national voice. And I don't get paid for it. I don't get a bonus. I do it because it allows my school to be in the news and our region. And some good things have come from this. I try to align when I have the extra time by the interviewer to add something economic development oriented, a plug for our region. But I also try not to pander. I also try to mention Georgia too, or Tennessee, right? So you got to balance it to be credible. Let's be frank, right? But it's been interesting. You know, we started out the year, and let's see, I've had one radio, the Port Alliance Economic Development did a podcast thing that hit yesterday, 2 TV, and I have several speaking things this month. So, I mean, it's a little bit slow, but you know, we're in Chinese New Year, so nothing's happening in China. So the proverbial, you know what's going to hit the fan when the manufacturing starts up again, and then you're seeing these record ships leave China, come over here, and you're going to see all the ships again in the port of LA and Long Beach. That's all I have for today, but you know, I wanted to open it up for questions. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, great job, and thank you for all that you're doing. I've got about 26 questions, but I'll limit it to one. My brain's going crazy. I love this. So when you're talking logistics, you know, your rail, rivers, roads, and air, you address what's going to go with the automatization on the roads. What about the other three?
Well, you are starting to read about some autonomous ships. I think another really big area is this thing, A&M's doing some work on this, like a hyperloop, where, you know, think about those pneumatic tubes at the bank, and you drop a container and okay.
George Jetson, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a project I'm working on with the little kids, right? That's what they're presenting at the Lego STEM Challenge. I'm giving away some secrets here, but no, I mean, technology is going to help with some of this, but some of this is pretty futuristic, but it's not that far off. I mean, we're there. I think folks realize that we've got to accelerate how we employ technology. If we're going to keep American exceptionalism, we've got to be exceptional. We've got to leverage technology. We need to have more kids going into STEM programs. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure. Anyone else? Yes.
Margaret, I was at an event a couple of days ago on the economic forecasting that Colliers did, and they talked about our need to rebuild the supply chain. They alluded to that. I'm sure some of it was the infrastructure. Could you speak more about what needs to happen in terms of rebuilding, if that resonates with you at all?
Yeah, well, what rebuilding means really, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is moving our procurement of raw materials and our manufacturing and our sub-assembly closer to our borders. So that is really thinking about it being geographically diverse. Think about your stock portfolio. It's diversified, right? So we cannot have all our production in China, period, or Southeast Asia. So it's that nearshoring and onshoring. And then the second part is there's a lot of wasted space. So if I'm IBM and I'm shipping my computers, you know, there's going to be some air, there's going to be some empty space. So one of the things Amazon's doing is they're doing logistics as a service. So they have their stuff. They're bringing on airplanes and on charter ships, right? But then they are leasing out other space to other companies. So I think some collaboration between entities, and something I'm famous for saying for the last 2 years, and it's Charles Darwin, survival of a species is collaboration and adaptation. And Amazon has done all of that. And I think they're going to be the formula to emulate, but I think it's the collaboration on how you ship, and maybe collaborating with a competitor even, right? Sometimes your competitor can be your friend. And that gets back into the data sharing, et cetera. So I
Is
think,
UPS a part of that? Because they've kind of been a logistics leader in the last decade or so.
yeah, UPS, it's really interesting. The president of UPS International spoke at the conference I was at last week, and they have definitely been agile and on the leading edge in that sector. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill itself? And I mean, you talked, some of your slides were presenting, hey, we've got to get, grant applications, stuff needs to be moved to the boards. It just seems like we're going to get bogged down, or are we seeing that the government is going to be pushing out the money so that we can get some of this stuff moving forward?
Well, I'm not an expert on the infrastructure bill, but my takeaway is a lot of the money is going towards bridges and roads. And I mean, no question, our infrastructure, if you look at, what is it, the American Society of Civil Engineers, it's a C-, in some places it's a D or an F. We just have not invested in infrastructure in decades. So and let me take a step back. My first career, I was on Wall Street. I was a stockbroker, but I sold municipal bonds. So this was the late 80s, 90s. And this is when every major city in America was building a new airport, expanding their port, building a bridge, building a hospital. That's the last time I remember major infrastructure, back into the late 80s. So we have a lot of work to do. I don't think that, on the port side, I don't think the 17 billion is adequate. If you realize 90% of all trade globally is on a ship. And once it gets here, it's got to get on a truck or a rail, right? So these are really critical areas. If you're not from like a port city, like say Houston, and kind of in that inner city near the port, you kind of, you don't see it, you don't think about it. In my world, it's like the center of the rest of the modes, right? Because you got to connect to the port. And I know this man runs drayage out of Port Houston. How has your business done? You've probably been really busy the last year.
Very busy. It's been quite a boom. We've had the best year ever last year with less drivers,
Right.
And that's the driver shortage is very real. It's not just talked about. It's real. It's hard to get good drivers, and part of it is there are drivers out there, but for companies who do things right and follow all the DOT regulations, you can't use every driver that's available. So if they've had too many accidents, if they've had a drug conviction, there's all kinds of things that limit drivers. So our business has been good. People are sort of throwing money at us to get the ships, the containers moved. And it's good in a sense, but you also don't want to gouge your customers. You're long-time good people. So so it's kind of a balance. One of my struggles and concerns, but I was curious if you might have some insight on, is when is this going to end, right? They're talking about doing the interest rates are being raised. There's gonna be an up and down. It's gonna happen sometime, whether it's this year, next year, 5 years from now, whatever it's gonna happen, it will happen at some time. So that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around, is how do I plan for that next downturn?
Well, okay, so we have inflation ravaging. So let's take the person on a fixed income, like they're making $1,500 a month, and now their grocery bill is 30% more, but they only had an extra $100. So now they have negative. So, consumers have started slowing down. Is it at an astronomical amount? No, but is it noticeable? Yes, we saw in the retail sale numbers in December. It's not sustainable, the spending that's occurring. So I think in general, economists feel like in the next 6 months, maybe, you're going to see a slowdown in spending. So that impacts demand. But the COVID deal it's not over. Okay. It's not over. We've got to learn to live with it. And when you have China having a zero COVID policy where they're closing factories down, that contributes to the turmoil. What we haven't even discussed yet is what happens if this altercation or potential altercation in Ukraine goes through. Okay. So you're going to see disruption in the oil and gas sector. You're going to see inflation in that particular sector. So all bets are off, but we easily have 12 to 18 months. And there's no sugarcoating this. The reality is it's going to take a while for the global supply chain to normalize, but part of it's going to depend on consumers slowing down their spending. The hike in interest rates will certainly help. The lack of disposable income, because they've spent all their savings on Amazon, right? I mean, how many of you ordered stuff? I mean, I'm not a big online shopper, but you know, when I don't want to go out and it's some little gadget, I do like ordering because it saves me time. But I mean, people were literally just sitting at home. Oh, I think I'll buy a couple pair of tennis shoes today. You know, so we have a while. But I do think more trade will be coming through Houston
It
and
already is.
the Southeast lane. It is,
So that's
yes.
part of our boom is the ships that were coming to California, they're now bringing smaller ships into
Right.
Houston. Another thing that happened that I haven't heard many people talk about is the Union Pacific used to service the port of Houston to Dallas. Before COVID happened, they canceled that service. It wasn't long enough. They weren't making enough money. So now all that stuff that used to be on train from Houston to Dallas is going by truck. Well, then you had the COVID thing. So now we're getting all this influx of stuff that all these containers used to go from California by rail to Dallas are now coming by ship to Houston, and we're having to truck them from Houston to Dallas. And so that's increased the number of truck drivers needed to get these containers moved.
Well, and there's two other factors that I haven't brought in. One, and I was on TV like 2 weeks ago. One was the potential strike from BNSF, the other big rail line, and a judge put a temporary restraining order on that. I don't know if it'll hold up. And then secondly, the longshoremen have a labor contract that expires in July of this year in LA Long Beach. And you can Google the history of strikes on the West Coast. It's alive and well. It's not pretty. And you know, who knows how that will go? I mean,
Every time there's been a strike or close to that
yeah,
negotiation, we get busier in Houston because the shippers get scared of shipping through there. They're probably getting stuck on the shore.
I would hold that thought because, you know, that's coming up, you know, and I'm sure people, you know, sophisticated shippers are thinking about this ahead of time because we know what's happened historically there.
In light of that, what do you see happening timeline-wise with Freeport?
Well, I think that would be a better question to ask them, but I think the Highway 36A expansion is a really key for moving, like a freight corridor for moving goods up to the Dallas area and bypassing the Houston urban core. And, you know, I personally look very favorable on that Highway 36A expansion.
I do too. I'm just kind of curious, is it going to get going? It feels to me like it hasn't picked up much traction yet. Is that true, or what's your thought?
I think you would need to ask them that question. Okay. I mean, they do a lot of commodities there. I know they picked up one line of business from a TV interview I did. So yeah, you know, again, I think Freeport, they do a great job and they're a great asset to Fort Bend County. And we should all be working to support Fort Bend and Brazoria and Harris County and collectively. Yes.
So the railroad tracks are still there. So why hasn't the rail company come back to shipping by rail to Dallas from the port?
I don't know the answer on that, honestly.
That makes sense.
So the rail company still has it. I don't know why they chose not to reopen that route, but what has happened is steamship lines individually have started chartering their own rail services. And so they'll take a vessel and say, okay, we're going to put this 600 containers instead of trucking to Dallas, we're going to rail them up there. Can you pick them up in Dallas now? And so some of the steamship lines are trying to supplement that, but it's not a full time. It's more of a, we're going to do this to patch this mess, you know, to get through this hurdle. We're not planning on doing this forever. And I'm sure they're smart too. I'm sure they're modeling it as well and trying to determine, you know, to do it forever or not. But I don't know why the Union Pacific has not chosen or another rail hasn't chosen to reactivate that service.
That's wild.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're, yes.
Yes, so you had mentioned this automated buses coming along, and you also mentioned there's a shortage of truck drivers. Is there any plans for automated trucks And if so, how safe will that be?
How
Oh.
scary that sounds to me.
No, not only are there plans, there's over 10 autonomous truck companies doing trials right now. And the technology has been here for 10 years and they have millions of miles of data where they're testing them in all conditions, okay? Not just, you know, street driving on a sunny day.
Do they stop at stop signs?
That's better than most people.
I mean, you know, an autonomous truck isn't on drugs. They're not intoxicated. They're not sleep deprived, right?
Those are the bad things, but there are also ones that don't have families to feed in this area. I mean, we've got a lot of good people that have transitioned out of the military. We fought for 10 years to get their military driving record, if they were an 88 Mike in the Army, transitioned into their CDL so that they can have a good, robust driving record and get through here. But guess what? There's a drawdown in the military, so that lowers that fluctuation. I do have an econ question for you.
But wait, I have two solutions. First of all, some of our best students come from the military and the employers that work with me have a veterans preference. You know, what I find is the veterans that come in, regardless what branch of the military, is they have the practical knowledge. We're teaching the theory and they make great leaders in the classroom when I team them up with young people on projects. And they get to, you know, share these experiences. The other thing is the autonomous trucks aren't totally autonomous. There's people in the back room and they're not all software engineers. They're truck drivers too. Instead of going into the truck, they're in an office in a 9-to-5 job.
And I've seen some great models, and I know Tesla's been pioneering a lot of things, and we're actually working, we've got a current grant working with the military on some projects. But my brain just keeps wrapping around the economic impact is that we take in all of these mega ships that you were talking about, and we ship over nothing. In fact, they're fine with paying the fines of having no connexes on that ship. How do we solve that problem?
That's a federal issue. The Federal Maritime Commission in Washington, D.C. they need to step in. That's not something we can do at the state level. But you're right. I mean, what happened over the last several years pre-COVID is all these shipping companies, all the container shippings, I mean, they consolidated. It's an oligarchy. They control the market. So someone was asleep at the wheel.
Well, I've been hearing that there's federal rules that are not allowing certain containers to even come to our shore and offload. I don't know all the logistics to it, but it seems like they're keeping ships from coming and offloading.
I'm not really sure
You're not?
what you're referring to, honestly.
You're not?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, there are import-export laws. I mean, maybe, I have no idea. If there's a news story you read, you can shoot me a copy and I'll look into it for you. Yes.
So as we get all these container ships coming in, our economy continues to expand. We're transitioning from brick and mortar to e-commerce, still with a growth. It's just not all. It's instead of being 80% brick and mortar, 20% e-commerce. We're seeing a shift in that, but we're still having growth. And we get all these boats coming over here to unload. What do we need to do? Do we need to go 24/7 on our port? That was something I think you mentioned earlier on all of our ports.
Well, that's a really complicated thing. So you read about the Biden administration doing this big meeting in Washington and you had all these people. Guess what? They didn't invite the guys that own the ships. They forgot a few people at the party. Yeah, right. You know, if you're gonna, you know, anyone that does urban planning or transportation knows you got to bring all the parties together. So there are some people that weren't there. Then secondly, they're talking, oh yeah, 24/7. Well, that means the warehouses and distribution centers have to be 24/7. The port could be open 24/7, but if you don't have those backside players, I mean, it's kind of a moot point.
Don't you need to fix everything else before you start running 24/7?
Yeah,
Because all it's gonna do is just cause more mayhem.
We don't even have the people to service that.
Yes, it's very complicated. Yes.
Margaret, is there any more capacity in the Panama Canal?
The Panama Canal has been congested. there's no question we've seen record trade go through. And one of the things that I read about over the summer and is, what about doing a dry canal, like say through Guatemala, where it's rail and truck. And so there's a proposed scheme, right? Boat docks on the Pacific side, this massive canal, dry, couple of rail tracks, road. And I think that could be an interesting solution. Obviously, again, we talk about bottlenecks, the Suez Canal, we saw what happened. That was another disruption. And I mean, and what happened? They held the ship hostage. It wasn't the captain of the ship. It was the Suez Canal pilot that, got it jammed in, right? So.
I have a fun question, I promise. So besides what you're doing with the Lego program, which I love, how do we make it fun for kids in middle school to start getting into STEM and logistics, and sexy for those high school and college students that want to go into a field they're not quite sure? How do we get them off TikTok and into a program like this one so they can be the next level of professional problem solvers?
Okay, well, a couple of things that weren't on my resume. So I serve on Port Houston Partners in Maritime Education. So there's a series, let's just call it 7 or 8 high schools that have a logistics program. All the high schools now have this dual credit stuff. And so we work with a couple of the high schools, and they're really diverse. One is right by U of H main campus. It's Austin High School. It's predominantly Hispanic. And the other is Aldine, the career and technical. It's a predominantly African-American population. And so they're up by the airport. And so like my faculty and I work with both those groups. And we love the teachers they have, because the teachers at the high schools are trying to get the kids to the next level. Then there's other high schools we've tried to go to, and the teachers don't necessarily follow up, and it's like, okay, we're doing this on a volunteer basis when we go out and work with kids. But I think you've got to have industry and parents demanding at the school board that these kids get exposed to careers. I mean, we don't need any more. I mean, in the 80s, it was okay to get a history or a philosophy degree. We need people going in computer science, going into math, going into engineering. But it starts early. And I think the Legos was a great example with the little kids, like, elementary school. And, I think they probably kind of get out of it at intermediate, maybe intermediate. But I think, it's conversations. It's, if y'all have a school you want me to go speak to, I will do it in a New York second. So I think it's just getting the community, it takes a village. It takes a community going in and saying, look, our expectation is we want these kind of programs in the curriculum, or this type of exposure. I mean, I don't know everyone in the room, like when I was in elementary school, my dad was an engineer, right? So, when as a little kid, you think of professions, you think of a fireman, a policeman. I mean, things like, that's this visual, like, what do you see? You go to the grocery store, see policeman, see fireman, right? So, I mean, we've got to, I think, be more visible what these professions are.
And I would agree. I didn't know what supply chain was other than a truck driver until I joined the Army.
Yeah, and it's a lot more than a truck driver, right? I mean,
Exactly.
I don't have to explain what it is anymore.
Yeah, but so I have a 6-year-old, I have a 17-year-old, a 21-year-old, and my older kids, other than a doctor, a lawyer, astronaut, a firefighter, a plumber, something like that, they had no idea what supply chain was, project management, or anything, because they don't teach career types in any school.
But we need to.
Exactly.
If we're going to keep America as a leading economy, it's got to start in the elementary schools and the intermediate schools.
I guess that's part of the rebuild.
Let's hope. Well, I have, if you want a business card, or you can find me on the U of H website, or Carrie, or someone, Ryan, has my contact. So thank y'all for having me.
That's an engaging discussion. Excellent topic. I would like to thank our speaker today and our sponsor, Glenn Smith. I do believe we had people online. I did not give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Did you guys want to go ahead and introduce people online?
Hello, I'm Michelle Maksoud. I'm with DEC. How about Trisha, man? This is great. I like it.
Good, yes. Is there anyone else online?
Yes, I'm Connie Porter. I'm from Houston Community College, the Dean of the Business and Logistics Centers of Excellence. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
She's my friend.
And I don't know if you can hear me. My name is Lisa Hip. I'm full-time faculty for Dr. Porter in the Logistics College of Excellence. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Am I the only one?
Is there anyone else? All righty, I would like to make an announcement on some of our upcoming events. On Thursday, February 3rd, from 5 to 7, we have network nights and bites, and that would be held at Hope Biosciences with McGuire Woods LLP. And on Thursday, February 10th, from 5:30 to 8, the Fort Bend Future Initiative is hosting Texas Blockchain Council reception at the Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce. If you're interested in joining an upcoming event, please check out our calendar at thefortbendchamber.com, where you get updates and register. Those engineers can claim a professional development credit hour towards registration requirements. We have certificates at the table, and if you're online, you can go ahead and email